Hey, members of the Plus Soldier fam, and hopefully members of the RONIN clan as well. If you weren't aware beforehand, a little while ago, I teamed up with my new friend RONIN CHARIZARD, as he is a new and talented content creator focused on Pokémon what-ifs. And together, we present to you this collaborative project. If you missed part 1, you can find a link to it on RONIN's channel in the iCard above and in the description below. So please be sure to go check it out first, since this part has no recap. And while you're there, check out his other content and please consider subscribing and supporting him. Now, on to the story. With embarrassment fueling him, Ash made his trek through Viridian Forest fairly quickly, purposely dodging a good number of trainers he could have battled and even risking flashing fear on the odd encounter of aggressive bug-type Pokemon. He continued like this until sundown, where he made it about 2/3 of the way through the forest and came upon a clearing where an awesome battle was currently underway. A samurai armor-wearing trainer wielding a Metapod, which had suddenly evolved into a Butterfree, had just seen it knocked out by a Squirtle being used by a familiar face. Ash had traveled far and fast enough to catch up to Gary. Samurai then released his pincer, in anger that such a joyous moment for his Pokemon had been spoiled. Gary, thinking not to push Squirtle so far that it faints, switches out to his second team member, and the Pokemon he viewed as his co-starter along with Squirtle. Rhyhorn appeared, and was clearly ready to take on the more powerful bug type, as he and Gary's synchronicity was already demonstrably high, and that combined with the type advantage proved too much for the arrogant samurai. Ash was a bit awestruck. Gary was already way ahead of him even though he'd physically caught up. Rhyhorn seemed to sense him, as it nodded towards the boy's rival at the edge of the clearing, while Gary came up to praise it and speak to Samurai. Now even more excited that he got to show off in front of Ash, Gary calls him over with a bit of snark and wanted to compare where he was, considering that he already takes him a bit more seriously due to Giovanni's influence on him.
As you'd expect, Ash tries to summon the confidence and bravado by explaining he's already caught his second Pokemon. But Gary brags he had already caught every single species in the forest and on Route 1. Ash nearly wilts, but instead points out that his team is more focused on a core instead of just catching for the sake of catching. Giovanni said it was always better to establish a solid foundation before one begins to take on more complicated and crowded tasks. Gary raised an eyebrow at the idea, as it was one his grandfather thought to remind him of. He had accidentally ended up catching both a Pidgey and a Pidgeotto in his haste, and had asked the professor to take the weaker one off his hands. It was just another reminder that the little dweeb that he had been so far ahead of for all this time wasn't staying weak anymore, and he'd be a slowpoke's tail before he'd let that happen. Samurai interrupts, as he wasn't introduced and he had set about healing his Pokemon. He recognizes the Viridian City leader's name and explains he had battled a red-haired trainer with a weird orange Pokemon after he insisted on a battle. He told him 2 other kids who had also started for the gym and said he should challenge them all as well. Gary was the last of the Palatown trainers he had battled, and the first he had actually lost to after he and his pincer got much stronger pending the defeat against Richie. He invites the 2 trainers to come and stay with him at his cabin near them, as in the morning he was planning to finally leave the forest and go to the Pokemon Center to get registered for the Pokemon League. The world has grown much bigger, and he had already had a lot of rivals. Ash was a bit surprised and yet relieved at getting more time before it was necessary to battle again, though it was very clear that Gary was going to want a battle due to his bragging. As
they retire, a completely different redhead than Richie ends up blazing past where they were on her bike, as she is chased by a horde of Beedrill and uses her Starmie and Staryu to protect her and light her way, as she yells and curses the little twerp who chickened out of her revenge battle and never let her vent her anger for his theft of her bike. So in this timeline, Misty actually ends up reaching Pewter City by nightfall by herself. After eating a barely passable dinner with all their Pokemon and turning in for the night, Ash had a bit of trouble relaxing but eventually fell asleep while thinking of how to handle his first rival battle. Just a few hours later at the crack of dawn, Gary had he and Samurai woken up, and he definitely got a kick out of seeing a groggy Ash clumsily go about his morning routine as fast as he could. Though, with Samurai nearly as gung-ho as Gary was to get a move on, he decided he would forego a battle against Ash, as he wanted to catch some more bug-type Pokemon and train more as soon as he could. He agrees to referee Ash and Gary's battle though, as he was their new friend. So now, set with a 2-on-2, the battle was on, as Gary once again sent out his Rhyhorn. Ash had to guess that he outright wanted to test his Giovanni gifted Pokemon against Ash's own. That worked for Ash though, as when it came down to Fear or Sandow, he much more trusted his partner, even though he was still a bit scared of activating Moxie. And with that, Ash released Sandow with a call of "I choose you."
With Samurai's signal, Gary began aggressively in order to horn attack, which Rhyhorn charged for, as Ash decided to play more cautiously with his smaller Pokemon and countered with Sandow's new Scary Face attack, which made the Rhino slow down enough for it to follow up with a Sand Tomb, trapping it. Ash excitedly cheered and ordered his partner to take advantage of it and use his Bite attack, but Gary this time countered with a Smackdown, which hit Sandow from afar before it could close the distance completely, though the ineffective Rock-type move didn't stop Sandow fully, as it sunk its powerful jaws into the rocky hide and used its strength to wrestle the larger Mon into the pit of sand, actually dragging it deeper and using its species skills to overpower Gary's second Pokemon, cursing as he realized it was his loss and that he underestimated Ash, or more so, he'd underestimated the lack of knowledge of the Sandile line and its power. Gary conceded and returned Rhyhorn, as he was sure it'd likely faint already. Soon after, up popped an energetic Sandile, who Ash could tell was feeling its first Moxie boost. It looked back happily at Ash, clearly wanting more of Ash's praise and showing him that he was still in control of himself. Maybe Sandile just wasn't ready for the full boost of Moxie, but a simple +1 or 2 boost could be manageable, giving Ash even more of his confidence back. Holding back no longer, his ace and starter was released. Squirtle, who he at least knew had a type advantage, and the long-range attacks could deal with Sandile better. This time, Ash was aggressive, and that suited Sandile just fine, as its strength had increased, and ever since taking on the Sparrow Flock, it had felt much faster. Though the speed couldn't catch Gary off guard again, he ordered Squirtle to withdraw, and use its shell to tank Sandile's bite. Though to Gary and Ash's shock, literally something else happened this time, as its fangs began to crackle with electricity, like it was being struck with lightning. Ash realized that Sandile learned the move Thunderfang, maybe from an egg move, or in the Battle of Furo, and instantly cheered for Sandile to keep it up and finish the battle, as Gary was about to order a rapid spin as it freed his partner from the super effective attack, only to be interrupted as light erupted from Squirtle's shell and it began to evolve, forcing Sandile's mouth to widen painfully and become stuck as Gary's new War Turtle appeared and glowed with a blue aura before it performed a powerful rapid spin, flinging Sandile up and away, before Gary roared to his partner to finish it off with a water pulse, as Sandile couldn't dodge. Hit hard with the super effective move, Sandile is basically one-shotted. Irritated that the evolution had come at just the right time for Gary, Ash returned his partner and thanked it for its hard work. He was really proud of them and felt much better about the future of he and Sandile. Though the Pharaoh he had been bragging to Gary about was still a tough nut to crack, and Gary was too excited to continue using his newly evolved and torrent-powered War Turtle to let him off easy. As soon as she was released though, Vera looked back to him and nearly tried to take off, likely to attack him, forcing him to return her and simply forfeit the second battle to Gary and end it in a tie. Then he waited for the teasing to come, though it never did, as Samurai and Gary joined him. The two began excitingly discussing the battle, as Gary asked Ash to see Sandile's Pokeball, and actually went on to heal and pet the little croc, wanting to study it a bit, and actually getting Sandile to warm up to him. Genuinely surprised, Ash admits he expected Gary to be much harsher on him, and ends up venting his frustrations, so far making Gary laugh at him and call him his old hated nickname. He asked Ash what Giovanni thought of how he was doing, and hearing that Kanto's strongest gym leader thought Ash was doing good, he remarked that was the truth then. Gary then somewhat angrily told Ash not to call himself his rival if he had no faith in himself. He had been no fun to crush at all like this. With that, he told Ash and Samurai to smell him later as he was off to get his first gym badge and bolted out. Samurai then bid Ash farewell, as he still wanted to catch a Kakuna before leaving the forest, and mentions that he was confused as he hadn't found any for some reason. Wanting to stick back for a while, Ash knelt down to Sandile and both apologized for how he had been acting, as well as once again thanking him for his help. He promised Sandile that together they'll completely master Moxie, making Sandile determinedly nod. And though he couldn't understand his promises to protect Ash and help him with his goal using all of its power, he and Sandile bolted off to catch up to Gary and ended up reaching the pewter PC very quickly, and asked Nurse Joy if she's seen Gary, who she points over to the cafeteria looking annoyed. Ash approaches Gary, who explains Samurai had come through and mentioned his destination and that his grandfather gave him another lecture as he switched out his team in preparation for the rock-type gym leader, so he hadn't even had a chance to battle yet. Just then, two people entered the gym speaking rather excitedly. Gary's eyes lit up in recognition of the taller male of the duo, being the very gym leader he was about to make his attempt on. With him was a redhead Ash was all too familiar with, and he felt a shiver at the sight of associating her with his apprehension earlier. The two checked Pokemon in with Nurse Joy before walking towards the cafeteria.
Brock wore a good-natured smile as the girl he ended up referring to as Misty excitedly yet fairly gracefully for a girl her age recalled the battle against Brock, mentioning how she didn't expect his Onix to be so tough as to turn the battle against her Starfish Pokemon into a war of attrition. Brock just chuckles and tells Misty they'll have to have a rematch with official teams someday. Having been fired up by Ash and arriving at Pewter so quickly, I believe this version of Misty would actually challenge the Pewter City Gym to blow off some steam, giving her the Boulder Badge. Gary quickly gets up and brings Ash over with him, unknowingly embarrassing him by putting him in Misty's line of sight, and she instantly begins teasing him for running away, also forcing Gary to hold back his laughter, as he asks Brock if he'd be willing to take on 2 more challengers. The Pewter gym leader responds that he can only take on a single trainer more today, as after work he had to take care of his siblings. Already having spent more time than many versions of Gary ever would in one spot, he takes the opportunity, and Ash's apprehension makes him hesitate anyway. Brock agrees and accepts the challenge, and he and Gary go off to have their battle, with Brock telling Ash he should come by in the morning for theirs. Afterwards, being left alone with Misty, rather than suffer more for teasing, Ash decided to get a room in the Pokémon Center and catch up on the sleep that Gary had robbed him of that morning. Meaning, he slept most of the day away. Or rather, he'd spent most of the day moping around in bed. As hearing of Misty's win against Brock, and assuming that Gary masterfully went on to secure his own boulder badge, and it probably left the city already, he finds himself with a restless mind once again. Sandile, while turning out to be a pretty friendly and good-natured Pokemon, as evidenced by it sleeping peacefully curled up next to him, had a dangerously powerful ability he had barely any idea of how to work with. And his only other Pokemon was Fearow, who combined with being far too powerful for him right now, showed no signs of accepting her capture, and was still trying to escape or attack him anytime he released her. By now, it was becoming night again. So, wanting to clear his head, he attempts to sneak away from Sandile, but the crocodilian Pokemon surprises him when he instantly pops awake by the slightest movement, and it seemed only a tad annoyed by being woken up before dutifully joining him at his side. Scary? Yes. Disloyal or lazy? Sandile most certainly wasn't. And so, Ash and his partner enjoyed a midnight stroll to clear his head. The Pokemon Center didn't close, but at night it became quiet and calm, and not wanting to disturb the nurse on duty, he decided to go out and explore Pewter a bit more.
However, he was being watched by the trio, who had taken a keen interest in him. Team Rocket Grunts, Jesse and James, along with their shared partner Meowth, had been tasked with the job of tailing and reporting back to Giovanni every now and then on the growth of the rookie trainer Ash Ketchum. Apparently, Butch and Cassidy had been given a similar task, as they took some solace in that. But from what they understood, they were apparently monitoring their future superior. Having to take calls from all of the three sponsored trainers every time they accomplished the smallest thing would grate on the boss's nerves, obviously. Though Jesse and James were incredibly irritated with their assignment, Meowth was simply wanting to be diligent to earn more recognition from the boss. But he had to admit, watching the kid mope around Pewter City and waste his time was making him anxious and angry as well. So he came up with an idea. Since the trio had decided against any actions against the Viridian City Pokemon Center, they have some options on how they could first approach Ash. Meowth, wanting to speed up the process, forces Jesse and James into the outfits more fitting of ace trainers, before explaining to them the plan. Meanwhile, Ash and Sandile found themselves behind the Pokemon Center on its battlefield, simply sitting and enjoying the night sky, when two older people and their Meowth freaked him the hell out by just popping up. As these kind of cliche descriptions usually go, Ash is lied to and fed a backstory of Jesse and James being retired champions of foreign regions, here in Kanto on their next step of their journey, and they explained that they couldn't help but notice that Ash was a Gloom trainer who they wanted to try and help. Thinking he's met some cool people, Ash explains to them his origins up until now, which they had been briefed on anyway. Jesse and James asked to see Fearow as well, but as soon as Ash releases it, it's clearly enraged with him. He was sure she was getting hungry, but when he tried to feed her earlier, she wanted nothing to do with him.
The bird Pokemon this time made no movements to fly away. Instead, she leered at her trainer, looking ready to attack Ash, which forced Sandile into his battle mode. Fearow stared at the ground type and nearly took off towards the duo, when suddenly, Meowth jumped on Ash's shoulder after snatching her Pokeball and returned her before bonking Ash on the head with it and yelling angrily in his face. That loud Fearow was uppity, but the normal type could understand why she was so angry, as she had mentioned Ash killed her babies. Now effectively shaken from his fear-frozen state, Ash freezes for a second time, as his brain tries to reboot from the shock of a talking Pokemon. Meowth also freezes, as he originally had no intentions of speaking and revealing his abilities. He simply chalked it up to his instincts wanting him to follow the orders from the boss to a T, since Ash being made into Swiss cheese by Fearow wouldn't have been good either. Hit with another realization, Ash quickly shook Meowth off by snatching Fearow's Pokeball away from it and releasing her directly in front of him, while he bowed his head to her shamefully and revealed all the Spearow were alive and well, and that he was very, very sorry that he hadn't thought to tell her that. Sandile had stayed on edge, as Meowth seemed to be attacking Ash for a second there, only for it to now warily look at Fearow as she towered over Ash, and he with a glare. To be honest, he didn't trust either very much. She then made the least aggressive noise that Ash had ever heard from her and simply flapped away to roost on a tree branch near the battlefield, and watched the group warily. With the cat out of the bag, Meowth confidently claims that they've already solved one of Ash's major issues, so tomorrow he should be able to get that badge and move on from Pewter City. Though he advises that he may want to go ahead and feed her, making Ash panic and quickly run into the Pokemon Center to get more food for his second team member, still unbelieving that she seemed to be coming around to him, or that a talking Meowth was the cause of it.
Returning, he saw the trio speaking in a little huddle. He interrupted them to cheerfully show them Fearow was eating, making Jesse and James annoyed at his optimism and positivity as they were eager to leave. Before they could, Ash stood back up and challenged Jesse and James to a battle, asking Sandile if he wanted to warm up before their first gym battle, to which the ground type, having been ready for a scrap anyway, cheered and leapt out in front of him. Fueled with both confidence at seeing Ash's naivety, as well as wanting to know what was so special about this kid, Jesse decides to accept the challenge and sent out what Ash recognized as as an Ekans. However, shocking them both due to its type advantage and the fact that Sandile was significantly stronger than a Pokemon owned by a trainer with no badges, Ash and Sandile actually went on to defeat Jesse in a couple of moves, causing Ash in his surprise to cheer his buddy on as Sandile enjoyed a Moxie boost and seemed quite in control of itself. This midnight stroll was doing wonders for his confidence actually. Infuriated, Jesse demands James' Pokeball and produces his coffee, which floats above the ground. She sneered that he couldn't win so easily. Ash and Sandile quickly syncing and deciding to use Sandile's growing speed and previously seen jump ability with the attack boost to snatch Coughing out of the air with its bite before again taking its opponent down with less than 3 moves. After Coughing's flinching, opened it up for Sandile to finish it off with a strong assurance. As a shocked and proud Ash celebrated with Sandile and Firo watched on, finishing her dinner, Jesse and James had to admit they could see the boy had some potential and skill, but they certainly didn't see what Giovanni had apparently.
To their annoyance, Meowth was laughing up a storm at their complete ineptitude against the newbie trainer. This, combined with Meowth being the reason they were in this embarrassing situation in the first place, caused Jesse and James to think of a sly way to get their revenge on the hysterically laughing cat. Walking up to Ash, they congratulated him on how far he's come in a single night. The two claimed they wanted to give him a gift to mark his accomplishment, and so they asked him to take Meowth along with him on his journey, making Ash and Meowth simultaneously exclaim, "What?" As that happens, James begins to smoothly lie that Meowth is a very special Pokemon, and that its intelligence has always meant it would need a really special trainer to bring out its potential. The two of them had wanted to do it, but it was hard enough working on the newest members of their team that he had just defeated and traveling simultaneously, so Meowth wasn't getting the attention that he deserved. As the Scratch Cat Pokemon tried to protest, Jessie spun on her heel and as hard as she could, beamed Meowth between his eyes with the Pokeball, as he didn't already have one. This made it easy to catch, and after retrieving the ball, she handed it to Ash with a smirk and told him to please train the cat Pokemon hard, before the two partners in crime giddily ran away, very obviously pleased with their practical joke. Confused, excited, and nervous, Ash called for Firo to come and join he and Sandile, which she surprisingly did, landing next to them with an unimpressed look, as Ash released Meowth, who rubbed his face and looked around for his friends, only to realize they really ditched him. It made him angry, but Ash was currently asking him questions like if he really wanted to get stronger, and even wanted Meowth to elaborate on how he learned to speak. Knowing that he was stuck with Ash for the foreseeable future, at least until his partners got over their bad joke, and that he couldn't reveal his connection to the boss or Team Rocket, Meowth was begrudgingly forced to play along with the act Jesse and James had put on, officially and strangely bringing Ash's team to 3. Embarrassed at the welcome to Ash's squad, Meowth insisted on the rule of never forcing him into his Pokeball ever again, which Ash was perfectly fine with, as he realized it'd give him someone to actually speak with, as he really enjoyed traveling and hanging out with Samurai and Gary, and having people to talk with.
Tired though, Meowth insisted that they go to sleep before the gym battle in the morning, but Ash was way too pumped and asked Sandile, Firo, and Meowth to do a bit of special training with him. Sandile excitedly agreed, fine with being awake late in the night. Firo still seemed aloof with him, but she didn't seem to be resisting anymore. Perhaps her pride and her strength had been hurt, leading to her welcoming a chance to grow. Meanwhile, Meowth was struggling not to scratch the boy's face to shreds as he realized how long a journey like this was going to be. The rest of the night was spent ingraining the first half of Ash's team and their skills into their young trainer, with Meowth using his brain as much as he could to avoid having to train very much itself. This does, however, clear up and polish any gaps in the primary knowledge Ash had about Sandile and the usual ways of dark type and more aggressive breeds of Pokemon from Meowth. We've already seen his battling knowledge is much more basically competent due to Professor Oak, realizing he wouldn't have a chance to officially mentor the boy. He took on that role a little more seriously, a little quicker to cram as much as he could in Ash's head before his 10th birthday. Sandile himself has pretty inherent distrust of Meowth, as it is so similar to the person Giovanni had, yet he is completely unaware of how deep the connection that is beyond cosmetic. Not to mention it was still a little wary around Firo, so right now it's taken a lot of pride in its position on the team.
The next morning, Ash actually ends up standing outside a Pewter City gym at the crack of dawn, surprising Brock and causing him to come outside and awkwardly inform him that he wasn't ready to open the gym yet, as he had yet to cook breakfast for his siblings and Pokemon, throwing Ash off his stoic and confident Giovanni-like bravado. He asked about how long Brock thought he would be, now trying to ignore the annoyed glare of Meowth from his shoulder, as he had only just gotten to sleep a bit after their long late-night training session before his new babysitting project had woken him up once again. With the answer being over 2 hours, Ash determinedly asked Brock to let him help speed it up, which the leader looks surprised about, yet decides to allow, and asks if Ash had fed his Pokemon yet, as he opens the door for him and invites him in. Meowth's stomach growled loudly, making Ash realize that he hadn't thought of that in all his excitement, and his own growling afterwards made Brock shake his head and chuckle as he gave Ash some tips about rushing and offered to let him join them as another guest wasn't going to hurt. Ash is confused when he realizes that Misty is currently staying with Brock, as she is keeping his siblings occupied while playing with them and their Pokemon. The two freeze when locking eyes again, before Ash's face returns to a grimace and Misty a smirk at seeing him back finally, also noticing the new Pokemon he carried on his shoulders. Brock, already seeing the tension, shoos them along into the kitchen to begin helping him and cut his work time down by 1/3, actually becoming a 4th, as the Meowth on Ash's shoulders surprisingly washed his paws and began to help as well, actually showing more proficiency than his trainer in the kitchen.
While they cook, the trio are forced to talk, so Ash is somewhat forced to explain to Misty his reasoning for running away, but confidently states that he and Sandile are in perfect sync right now. Brock is really intrigued, as he has already been curious about the starter Misty described. He and Misty were both interested in this gym battle after all. After feeding all their Pokemon and eating breakfast with Brock's family, the three trainers move out to the battlefield, where Brock took his position and Misty smugly leapt at the chance to referee the match instead of Forrest. With his team already revealed, Ash releases Sandile and Firo to speak with them before the match, and again apologizes for forgetting to feed them. He looks to Sandile and thanks it for all of its hard work so far. He looks to Firo and also once again apologizes for not informing her of her baby's fate after he caught her, and thanks her for having shown some mercy. He also declares that he is going to try to win this match with just Sandile and Meowth, causing the cat to quietly and angrily ask what the kid was thinking, and brings back up the whole thing they went over with rock types being super defensive. Ash smiles and surprises Meowth by petting him to calm him down, only to have it fleshly smack his hand away, as Ash counters that Firo is at a greater disadvantage than he is, and not to mention that she is strong enough that Brock may not want to hold back so much on her. Shocked, the cat scratch Mon had no rebuttal, as Sandile seemed to hiss in laughter, and Firo preened as she was returned to rest.
With Sandile at his side to watch the battle, Ash chooses Meowth to go first. Misty snickers at the seemingly bad decision, causing Ash to grumble and Brock to remind him that he can use and switch out all the Pokemon he had on hand, but Brock could not. He would be using only 2 since it was a first badge battle. And with that, out comes Geodude, making Meowth gulp. As Misty called for the match to start, Ash instantly called for a fake out from Meowth, which he had to agree was probably the best move, and so actually did it, as bad a battle as it was, instantly crossing the distance between he and Geodude and popping it right between the eyes. Though the attack hurt his hand, the rock type flinched back extra hard, as it was a critical hit seemingly. Ash and Sandile were happily surprised, and so Ash called for Meowth to follow up with a scratch, which he again did, only for his attack to be much less effective this time, and pretty much just glance off his target. Geodude regained his footing and focus, or lack thereof, and Brock ordered a counter with Mega Punch, hitting Meowth square in its chest and sending it sailing and skidding back, gasping for air as Ash asked if it was okay. Meowth was really slow to get up, as it was apparently a crit for crit in that situation, and his lower level and defense meant he took it way harder than Geodude did. One more attack would be all she wrote, and he really hoped the kid understood that, because if not, he'd be giving up. With Meowth kneeling now, Brock called for a defense curl and then a rollout from Geodude, which made Meowth hurry to his feet, panting in exhaustion. Racking his brain for an idea, Ash quickly realized that Geodude couldn't see well while spinning, and ordered Meowth to just start dodging and use Growl. The winded normal type had to admit that wasn't a bad plan, but was angry to have to execute it when he was already out of breath. He was able to dive to the side once and jump over Geodude the second time, causing it to stop spinning and have to start a whole new rollout to hit Meowth as he fell towards the ground and Geodude heard his growl again and again.
To Meowth's surprise, Ash cheered and he glanced back to see a wild look in the kid's eyes, as he gave a much more complex order than he had heard him attempt up until now. As Geodude leapt off the ground with a much weaker rollout, Ash ordered Meowth to extend his claws out as far as it could and use them to catch Geodude on its sides like a basketball. Instinct took over and Meowth felt full of energy despite its damage, as it did just what it was told, and extended, this time faintly glowing claws, which caught Geodude in midair and caused it to spin helplessly in Meowth's claws. Though its weight was far too much to do this for long, he instantly fell faster, only to hear Ash order it to slam Geodude as hard as it can with the extra weight. It was starting to like how the kid thought. Geodude hit the ground first, and much harder than Meowth, actually cracking the ground a tad, as Meowth lightly landed on its face and hopped off, panting hard. It did it. It defeated a gym leader's Pokemon with just its power. It took every bit of willpower Meowth had not to scream in victory, or curse out every Persian or Meowth to ever call him weak. Misty's jaw was on the floor, as Brock had to do her job and declared Geodude down for the count. He was too impressed, but had to finish the battle, and so asked Ash if he thought his kitten was ready for Onix, who appeared with the mighty roar. Though tired, Meowth had enough energy to bolt back to Ash's side and collapse behind him in a heap as his trainer squatted down to congratulate him and show affection towards Meowth, who spent the whole night trying to convince Ash its only talent lied in its brain. The Ace trainers were right. This Meowth had the makings of a championship Pokemon.
And so did his partner, who leapt onto the field and instantly fell into battle mode, which Ash was now very used to. Meowth had explained more about dark types and their ability to harness aggression and mischievous energy for their attacks. Essentially, fighting or being scared of this part of Sandile was only going to stifle them both. Ash and Sandile had to instead learn how to control and harness that destructive energy like they'd done against Gary, and the best way was by getting more experience battling without Moxie, as much as it put them at a disadvantage. Misty regained her composure and announced the second matchup had begun, which Brock took far more seriously as he ordered a rock polish from the beginning, while Ash wisely started off with a Sand Tomb to Brock's surprise. Remembering he still had access to his own stat moves, Ash called for Sandile to use Leer and get closer to use its new attack Dig. It hadn't mastered it in all types of ground yet, but it was always able to swim through the sand with ease. Brock countered with Onyx's own Dig and stacked it with a Dragon Breath, which caused Sandile to be blown away from Onyx as it outsped it. The hit worried Ash, but Onyx weren't known for their overwhelming attack, and so Sandile easily hung in there, only getting slightly angry by the attack. Ash then ordered it to counter with Rage, which allowed Sandile to break out of the Draconian Breath Beam and slam it in Onyx's head and eyes, before Ash ordered a bite and assurance right on Onyx's nose. And Sandile's powerful jaws meant for biting into rocks and prey alike meant this hurt, and so Brock ordered Onyx to shake off Sandile by thrashing as best it could, but Sandile hung on determined, as Onyx did everything it could to get it off. Finally, when both Pokemon were obviously exhausted, Sandile finally let go and fell to the ground as it fainted, and Ash returned it for a hit, and thanked it for battling so hard. Brock was either tougher than he thought, or something about his battles with Gary and Misty had made him take this one more seriously. Ash asked Meowth if he thought he could close out the battle, to which the cat vehemently glared and went to grab at Fearo's Pokeball. Ash rolled his eyes as he got the message, and complied, sending out Fearo, who didn't fly off the ground in confusion, as she was just told that she didn't have to battle. With everything explained to her in a few seconds, she glared at the lazy cat Pokemon, and then to the tired and opposing Rock Snake. At least her new trainer had given her some easy prey. Just before she took to the sky though, Brock recalled Onyx and declared Ash the winner, to his and Misty's surprise.
Onyx was on its last legs, and there was no way it could outspeed the mean-looking Fearow. Having fed it, he could tell that it was much stronger than Ash's other Pokemon, and so he saw no reason to let Onyx get hurt more than necessary. He awarded Ash with the Boulder Badge and tells him he's one impressive kid himself, also gifting him an item he thought Ash could make good use of in a King's Rock. Ash nearly cheers excitedly, but the weight of his first badge is heavier than it was in the cannon, and he finds himself spending a few more moments reflecting on the steps he took to get there. The challenges he had seen as so daunting now felt much more doable with his team having his back. He was still outnumbered, but he definitely wasn't alone. Misty approaches the two and begrudgingly admits that she had been wrong about Ash, as now the two were currently on the same level. Flint would likely still show back up around this time, as he had seemed to be aware Brock was ready and due to go on a journey. Though, as this story is written from the perspective which recognizes all the retcons up to Gen 8, it could be possible his mom is still there. Either way, Brock is given full reign to go out on a journey, and obviously he's excited to stick next to Ash and continue furthering his dream, really wanting to try caring for a Sandile, which he had never seen. Misty, feeling a bit awkward and still wanting a shot at Ash, as she still inherently didn't like him very much, decided she would tag along until they made it to Cerulean City probably. Soon after, the trio began and quickly made their way through Mount Moon with little incident, if you don't care to count the consistent bickering between Ash and Misty, or their arguing over who got to battle the trainers they crossed paths with. Meowth was getting sick of hiding its abilities to speak from the newcomers, as it wanted to tell them to shut up, and now was considering going back in its Pokeball. And this is where we'll leave the story off for right now.
Hey everyone, Ronin and I really hope you enjoyed this part, and with it being already fairly long, we'll just go ahead and get it done here. As always, a really special thanks to the patrons of the channel, who are one of the largest pillars of support for the channel. As this video was actually edited by Ronin, we simply didn't have the capacity to promote and credit you guys as I usually do on my own videos, though please be assured that we will be back to normal with the next main solo project on the channel. Again, we really hope you enjoyed, and please be sure to keep your eyes out on Ronin's channel for new content from him and the next part of this collaborative project. As always, be sure to take care of yourselves and the world around you. Remember, I love you, and always go beyond plus ultra. Oh, and that Black Lives Matter and trans rights. See you guys next time.